Bill Gates recently gave an interview to Axios on energy issues. And one of the points he was making is he was complaining about Greens who are advocating addressing climate change, but only with solar and wind, or with renewables broadly, but chiefly solar and wind. And his view is that that was just as bad as those that who were, quote, blocking action. And his view that that cannot actually solve the problem. And this, in his words, they're saying let's not make any trade-offs that would actually solve the problem. And just as one major example that Gates has in mind is he has recognized the need for nuclear power and seeing new nuclear power getting adopted, when in fact, and again, this is largely because of green opposition, I think we've actually seen nuclear energy being reduced around the globe in places like Germany. And Gates also has investments in a company called TerraPower, which is trying to build. I'm sorry. TerraPower is what's trying to build an advanced nuclear reactor, but he's also investing in a company called Carbon Engineering, which makes technology that would capture carbon dioxide emissions directly from the sky. And according to Axios, critics have objected to the idea that, because they say that investing in technologies that could capture carbon would lessen the urgency of cutting emissions, because it would create a way to take those emissions out of the atmosphere later. And I just loved Bill Gates's response to that. He said, maybe to encourage people to stop eating too much, we should stop doing heart surgery, because it's really letting people develop heart problems. And our very first segment when we revived Power Hour was Bill Gates is a better energy thinker than Elon Musk. And part of what I think makes him good as an energy thinker is that he's actually interested in solving what he sees as a problem. Like he thinks that rising CO2 is a real problem for humanity, and he wants to know what will actually solve it, not what is ideologically appealing to him. And I think what you're seeing here and what he's sensing is that the Greens don't actually want to solve the problem of climate change. They want to solve the, quote, problem of a high energy civilization.
Yeah, Gates is, I mean, he's definitely a breath of fresh air on these kinds of issues. I've been thinking a lot about the nuclear issue lately from the following perspective, because if we compare, if we compare the, what I would call the anti-human environmental movement that's obsessed with renewables and anti-nuclear, like, if you compare them with the people who say I'm concerned about rising CO2 levels and I'm for nuclear, people like Steven Pinker, and certainly Bill Gates. Obviously, the latter group is the pro nuclear group is infinitely superior, but it's important how far away we are from having anything like an all nuclear world, because I mean, as Gates is bemoaning, there's shutting down of existing nuclear plants, but nuclear is just, it's a tiny, it's far less than 10% of the world's energy production. It's probably around 5% now. And it's, if you just think about, and we're talking about a world that will hopefully have growing energy demand, assuming that we are free and that we don't have just some incredible global collapse. But it's just the I'll say more about this in a future episode, but just the amount of time and resources and ingenuity that have gone into our existing energy system are just unfathomable. And the, like, trying to change it to something else is something that, I mean, just you can say schematically, yeah, I can imagine nuclear could do stuff in a lot of different ways. Particularly, it can do electricity, and then we can expand electricity in all these different ways. But we're seeing with these things take so long. I mean, you're not even at the level where you have like a clear technology that's really commercialized that you can deploy and all these things. So if somebody is really concerned at this point, my view is more and more that if you're concerned about rising CO2 levels, I mean, one thing is you really have to focus on what I'd call climate mastery, on just different ways of handling the situations using a high, using the different technologies at our disposal. And you should really be interested in capturing CO2, because it's in some way that's plausible that you could do that. And if you could do that, that would be just infinitely easier than somehow, building a whole new energy system, particularly because the thing you need to build a whole new energy system is probably above all is oil. And that's part of the existing energy system, and that emits CO2. So the more I sort of study the scale of the existing system and the state of the alternatives, the more I just think there's no way these emissions are getting lowered significantly, unless I think what's much more likely is that certain countries will really act suicidally, and I think our country is potentially one of them. But in terms of just like if 20 years from now, just actually the idea that 20 years from now, yeah, we're going to have dramatically lower emissions just seems so dubious. And unless you could really capture them economically, it's a good thing, because we'll be a lot more prosperous. And now imagine that people have talked about, well, we've had general prosperity in the last X number of years. I mean, imagine a global recession, and then what happens to these green energy projects?